So first off, congratulations to me on winning the championship. Just so there's no dead air time, I want to make sure that you guys are all aware who your true champion is this year, opposed to whatever Colin Mattoon will say later. His opinion doesn't matter. It's all made up, and the points don't matter. I got the championship,
Just like this year in
just like who and what.
just like this year in fantasy. All made up and the points don't matter.
Doesn't matter. I got the money. I think that's what matters, right? I'll get the trophy for Boyer at some point.
Over my dead body.
I mean, that's fine. That's not hard to do.
I mean, that's fair. I'm pretty much trying to do that myself anyway.
I feel like Boyer's assembling forces to storm the Capitol.
We're past January 6th, but next January 6th, watch out, y'all.
I'm pretty sure this Zoom meeting just got flagged by whoever's listening.
Well, my FBI agent has
Yeah.
flagged a lot of things I've done on the internet, so it's not a big deal.
You and Oprah.
Boyer, your significant other said he's probably not getting on
Can we kick that guy out of the league already?
Where did Andrew Leasack go? I'll come back. All right, we got 9. We're missing Matt. We're missing Burns. We're missing somebody else. Oh, Colin Kelly, but he may or may not be on based on a call situation. So, Matt Fryer, you're in charge of you and Jeremy's conversation.
I always was.
I know, but I have to say this. So, like, Jeremy, I'm acknowledging that you were part of this team, but I know who's in charge.
This is recorded. I hope he doesn't watch it now. That's pretty bold.
Boyer, you're good with your assistant to the manager not being here?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure if he's on the chat or anything, but I just sent him a message was like, hey, I don't know if you know this is happening, but I'll send you the link if you don't have the link. So as of right now, he's not on it, and that's fine. I can give him the cliff notes.
He did text me. Him and Alyssa are moving places, so they're working on packing and everything. He said he may or may not be on, but don't count on it. I said you'll fight the battle anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah, to be fair, I missed this, or I was like an hour before this, where dinner was in the oven and was still like 30 minutes left. I was like, oh shoot, I've got that stupid meeting today. so I almost missed it myself.
Is Bagwell's title Boyer's bitch or is it secretary? What is it?
Assistant
right now, assistant to the manager.
Coffee boy, got it.
But
all right, so we're gonna get started because I'm over your guys' nonsense, and I think this is everybody that's gonna be on. We had talked about scrapping a 5th round pick starting in 2026. Do we want to continue talking about that, or do we want to just leave 5th rounders? I know some of you guys like it, some of you love to trade for 5ths, but we talked about maybe the 5th rounds. If we don't take them, it opens up some of the waiver. But at the same time, you're going to cut them more than likely come 53-man cut anyway. So does anybody have an opinion on that?
I'm to the point where I'm probably gonna cut them anyway. So I mean, I just look at my taxi and what picks are available. The only thing that I have noticed in the league is that picks will sometimes kind of go towards certain managers and run away from others. And having that extra 5th round pick gives them a chance to be in the draft, be involved, and still draft somebody to put them on their taxi. So, but personally, I'd be okay at this point, I think, booting him.
He's going to cut him, but we're going to boot him. I got it. Sorry, we're talking. I thought you were going the other way.
Boyer, you can just say people like me only have a 4th round pick this year, so we get it.
I also think Burns has like maybe 2 picks in the next 3 years or something silly. So I mean, not that bad, but there are definitely a few teams that's happened to. So having 5th rounders, might give them an avenue to be able to at least draft, which is part of the fun of fantasy. So I can understand keeping it, I suppose.
Yeah, I know Puga was a 5th round pick this year, but I think he might be the only one that's come out of the 5th round in 3 years now to do anything. So I don't think we're losing a lot by cutting it. I think my 5th round pick this last year was a cut down day chop for me. I didn't even hold on to him as a rookie. So with taxis being 6 spots for 2 years, I think those guys are more often than not going to get cut anyways. So I'm fine with letting it fall off in, what is that, 2026, whenever we started locking those picks, let them fall off then.
Anybody else have a care? I'll take that as a no. So I've heard mostly get rid of. Would anybody argue to keep them? Mattoon, I know you've talked about possibly wanting to keep them. Lisak, anything?
I mean, I prefer to keep him, but I'm not like I don't really care to make a case for it. Like if it goes away, I'm not gonna lose sleep over it.
Well,
I'm with you. Well,
I mean,
Paul
It's a
has more
fifth round-
picks
it's a
this
fifth
draft
round
than he
pick,
has
like-
roster spots.
yeah, I mean, like Puga was a 5th round pick last year. I mean, don't sleep on Stenson Bennett either. I mean, he could still be something. I'm just kidding. Andy.
But so part of it is we're allowed to pick up the guys that aren't drafted or guys that aren't brought into the season anyway to put them on our taxi. So like
Yeah.
if we don't draft those 5th rounders, they're getting cut at the 53 man, and then at that point you can pick them up again in the season. So
Which would have been
Puka
real interesting
probably-
with Puka.
So like I've got Dontavian Wicks on my team, and I don't know that he was drafted last year, and I picked him up on, so I mean, does it matter? We're gonna end up moving so many of the taxi guys around anyway. So I'm cool leaving it and just saying, hey, draft it, and it is what it is, or getting rid of it and whatever. But like we said, most of them are getting cut regardless. So I just wanted an opinion. It got brought up. It was asked about last year, and we said we were going to hold off until this year to make a decision. If we do cut it, Burns and Underhill have made a trade in 2026 for 5th rounders. Burns and Underhill had both told me they're cool moving it up to 25 5th and giving Burns his 26th 5th back just so he could lose it. So just so everybody's aware, there was one trade and I've made note of it and we can adjust it. Remember, you're good with that, right? Still? Is Underhill still there? Oh, he's awake. He doesn't have a clue.
Who was that again? I couldn't even tell you.
You and Burns traded a 5th round pick in 2026.
Sure. If you say
Okay.
so.
Okay, great. Glad that conversation happened.
So we're
Um,
scrapping.
That's what it sounds like. Everybody okay with that? Nobody's losing sleep over it?
Not at all.
All right, great. I will put a poll out there just in case Jeremy, Kelly, and or Burns have a strong opinion about it before I officially make a motion here, but the goal is to scrap it. All right, Jeremy shouldn't have a say because his other manager says I don't care. All right. There was a conversation this year about IR spots and when they need to be pulled off of IR. Some of us know who I'm talking about. He just shakes his head.
I have no idea who you're talking about.
So hypothetically, IR players, we can have out players.
A classic.
To questionable back to out.
We lost you for all of that, Ty.
That's great. Good. I'm glad we had that conversation.
I'm glad we recorded this, by the way.
So we know that IR guys go for, or out guys go from out to questionable back to out during the same week. After Sunday, Monday, when practice reports come in, they go back to questionable. And then Thursday or Saturday, they go back to out if they're not going to play, but they quote unquote aren't deemed out until later. Sleeper does lock it. It says, hey, you cannot be, you can't make a roster move as long as that guy's quote unquote questionable. So I think that for me, that's enough. The sleeper goes ahead and manages that, and it is what it is. I had a couple people bring it up to me, so I wanted to throw it out there. As soon as they come off of IR or off of out, and they're quote unquote deemed by the team to be doubtful for next week, but they're quote unquote questionable on sleeper, do we make people pull them up just to put them back down on out, or do we just let sleeper do its thing?
Sleeper do his thing.
I kind of agree with that.
I don't though. Here's why. And Andrew, this is nothing against you, but you got people who have 7 players that need to be on IR, and we're having to cut players just to fill an active roster spot, right? And then when you have a player who is putting up points sitting on the IR, that manager should be forced to put them on their bench and drop somebody.
It's my understanding, and I could be wrong, this could be Yahoo or something, but it's my understanding that IR players, once they're no longer out, that sleeper will not let you make any roster moves going forward. Is that correct? Am I
That's
right on that?
correct. But if
Okay.
you set your lineup and you don't have any bye weeks for 4 weeks, you can still roll with technically an extra active guy on your roster.
Sure, but it also prevents any trading or anything like that with that player. So
But my point is, some managers are being forced to make moves and others aren't. So for sake of
would you feel better about 8
shit.
IR spots instead of 2?
That's not even the point. It's just in a league where we're already, I mean, I've heard it from everybody. We're complaining about the lack of waiver wire activity, the lack of transactions on and off, free agents, etc. That's one way to help ensure that.
Sure, I guess I feel like there's still a detriment for the manager to be keeping that player on IR, is that they can't make moves, they can't do things, they can't make trades. And if that's a decision that they want to make, like sleeper is taking care of that. I don't see a reason why we should be giving, our commissioner any reason to have to add just one more thing to the plate. Sleeper takes care of it, and if you play within the sleeper rules, then you play within the sleeper rules. Like, I have no problem with that.
That's my I could care less one way or the other. But it does make life more difficult for whoever has to keep track of that. I thought that was the whole reason why we were just kind of following sleepers, I guess, rules or however they have it set up.
Right. There's still a detriment to the manager if they don't do it. You can't say that it doesn't affect them, right?
The one time
it does affect them.
The time that it didn't affect me was when I had my roster set on Monday, and
Correct.
I didn't have to worry about dropping somebody because it was just set.
Right, but you also but if you got a trade offer that was particularly juicy that week.
No, they still
you can still do trades. It's
I just can't put that guy in my starting lineup.
So Boyer, if you want to follow the sleeper rules, I could set my starting lineup after week 4. Let's say everybody had a week 4 bye. Week 5, I could be set for the rest of the season. I could trade 1 first for 7 guys, and sleeper is going to say you're good, even though I have 32 guys on my bench.
Yeah, you just can't start. You just can't start any of those.
I just can't move anybody
until you drop
at that
7
point.
guys.
Right. So I mean, so
where do you draw the line? Is my point.
So you're relying on a best ball strategy at that point versus everybody else who's making moves and moving things around and getting starters.
Some people depend on best ball strategy.
Hey, listen, we'll get to that in a minute. I'm sure that's on the docket.
But I guess my point is, why have roster limits if you're not going to be held to them?
But I mean, what point does that happen? Like the minute that the team that, like, is it if a guy starts at 8 o'clock on Sunday, if he goes from out to questionable, he's got to be out before the game starts, and that's it. Is that what the rule would be? Like, before their game starts, you have to pull them out?
a guy wouldn't go from out to questionable right on game time. It would be the
I think
opposite.
I think that this kind of actually brings up a bigger point that I'm going to make for the elephant in the room anyway, which is we're all freaking adults. If somebody's abusing something like in just a stupid way, that's when we're going to kick out the manager, right? I mean, like if Andrew was doing this, like in your explanation, for 8 weeks or whatever, we're gonna be like, Andrew, like we're done. Like we can't. Like this
I mean,
isn't.
I'm
This isn't the
perfectly
point,
fine
right?
stopping doing this. I only did it because I didn't have to make a decision. I'm like, I don't know who to drop, so I'm not going to do it because my lineup was set.
Right. And
So
I feel like
I'm
that's
I'm
within the
fine. I'm
sleeper
fine with
rules.
changing the rules.
So I'm fine with that.
I just don't know what, like, do we need to make a punishment for it? Do we just make it a rule and then
I don't
yell at
think we need
people
to
if they
make.
don't do it?
I don't think we need to make a punishment. Like I'm not trying to sit here and crack the whip
Well,
on
yeah,
it.
but then
I'm
what's
just saying,
I
just
guess
keep
what's the
roster
point?
compliant. That's the only thing I'm asking.
Yeah.
Nolan, get on the video chat. Stop chatting.
Mattoon, I think you swayed me on that one. I think I'm more on board with what you're saying. If your
Yeah,
player's
I think.
active, then they really shouldn't be in the IR.
Yeah, I
'Cause
agree.
Here's
I
here's
think.
one
I think
way
that
that
makes.
I broke this down to Tyler when he first asked me about it. Is if you have a player on IR that is putting up points, I think they're still contributing to your max points for. So essentially, you get one extra player contributing to max points for.
Which hurts you as a manager if you're trying to tank.
Or in the opposite, because I mean, let's be real. If we all have an average of 4 picks, if we eventually scrap, the 5th rounder, how many of us own all 5 of those picks per year? I'd say very little.
Colin Kelly.
So you're not just screwing yourself, you're screwing everybody in every which way. You know what I mean? This whole thing's a spider web after year 1.
Yeah, I'm not
Well,
opposed.
I don't feel like it needs like a punishment attached to it or anything. I think if we see that it's happening and say, hey, fix it, then fix it. Like, is that easy enough to do?
And it does. It sucks. It sucks to drop somebody, right? Like, because you filled that spot and you're like, shit. Or a guy that's been on IR for 4 weeks and you picked up a gem and you're like, now who do I drop? It
Right,
sucks. And it's bad, but that's what attributes to the waiver wire as well, right? Where people are dropping and moving people around. And that last spot, we're so deep, that last spot realistically should be a revolving door of who's coming on and off of IR anyway. So I would essentially say when they come off of out Monday, if they're still not out already, because they know it's gonna be a 3-week absence, and maybe they're like, he's out the next 3 weeks. It goes to questionable Monday, he's out Tuesday or Wednesday. That's different when they're like, hey, he's out for 3 weeks minimum, but they don't want to put him on IR, versus a guy that's like, they're questionable to return, they're 50-50, but at the same time, then somebody's got to monitor. But I would say generally, if they come off of out, they should be moved up, and then you have to play adjust. If that guy goes out again, you can move him back down and then pull somebody back onto your roster and be playing that revolving door of the bottom spot.
Yeah, I'm perfectly fine with just having an understanding of that. I guess to Lisak's point is, at what point are we making these decisions? If there's not going to be a punishment, then where is the accountability coming from? I'm assuming it's because we're all adults and we want to play in this league. And if Ty messages you and says, hey, you got a guy in your IR, we know he's going to be in your IR for the next 8 weeks. Please, or that he's coming off this week for sure. You need to make a roster move and drop somebody and get things going forward, right? Like we're expecting everybody to be adults and understand what's happening. And as long as that's good, then we can just move forward with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good with it. I think it is a case by case basis because, like I said, if there's somebody that's out for 3 weeks, they're like 3 weeks minimum, but hopefully he'll be back week 4. A team doesn't want to put him on IR, so then he's going to go from out to doubtful, out to questionable, and it's going to lock up your roster. But if a guy says, hey, he's 50-50 or he's probably going to start and he's questionable, it's hard to say, hey, yeah, just leave him there and wait it out till Sunday.
I mean, I think if he's scoring points, get him out of there. And like, I don't think we need to put a penalty on it. Just if it's happening, fix it. And
Move
if
on.
if we notice, we'll call you out and publicly shame you. Nolan will send you hourly gifts for the next week
Thank
as
you, Nolan.
punishment. Thank you for volunteering.
I'm good with it.
Lisak, we still love you. You're good, man. No one's mad at
Hey,
you.
I didn't break any rules. You are welcome
No.
to call it the Leasac rule, but I didn't break any
Ooh,
rules.
I like that. Let's
Here's
call
the
it that.
irony. I think the person, correct me if I'm wrong, is back on IR now.
I don't know who it was.
It was Higby, wasn't it?
It was Tyler Higbee.
Was it?
Yep.
Cool. I was following
You can
all
go
the
ahead and
rules.
put him back.
I was following all the rules.
I'm whatever. It's fine. It's
We're-
done. It's over with. We're moving on.
Yeah. No, I'm good. I'm just making fun.
All right. Another thing that came up is adding an IR spot. Thoughts on that? I know that Mattoon whined all year because he's a little bitch and said, I've had 12 guys injured, and he kept the tally and whatever. But I do have a couple people that did mention maybe it would be a good thing to up 1 or 2 IR spots. We currently have 2. We can go up to 10 via sleeper. That will never happen. I will not go that high. So adding 1 or 2 IR spots.
Not Ty. 10 would have been helpful.
I'm sure it would have. I don't know who the hell you were picking up though. You would have hated yourself trying to move those guys back off of IR later. But anyway, I'm okay with 1 or 2 if we want, but I think if that's the case, it has to be IR players on IR. Opposed to you have 4 out players, where 2 are designated for out and 2 are designated for IR. Opposed to, which is also a pain in the ass to monitor. But you have 4 guys that are out for 1 week. There's no reason to put 4 guys on your IR spots to pick up 4 just to drop them again the next week.
It does make sense.
Then it doesn't make sense, or it does?
No, it does. It does. If we're doing like 4, 3 is kind of on the fence, but
Right. So if we do it that way, if we up it to 3, fine, I'll still allow the out. If we go to 4, I think the new 2 have to be IR 100%, because there's no reason to put 4 out guys, because they'll be deemed out for an ankle or a hamstring for 1 week, and you're like, great, I get to go pick up 4 new guys, and then we're going to get into the same situation we were just talking about.
yeah. Well, they go out too if they're not on the active roster. So
Right.
Honestly,
So
I have not had a ton of issues as far as IR and bench. I mean, we have a pretty deep bench, and we've kind of talked about that, which is why the last ruling that we just talked about was that, if you got a guy and he's going to play, you gotta put him back on your bench so that way waivers can move around and stuff. So I'm fine with where IR is at. Mattoon, I do feel for you. You had a bad year on injuries. I mean, like, shit in fantasy football just happens. If it's redraft and there's no IR, you're just screwed, right? And Dynasty is a little different because you want to be able to hold on to guys. So you can't just drop a bunch of guys who are on IR. So I totally get that. But at the same time, because we have a deeper bench, even for Dynasty, if I remember that right, I think we added like an extra guy or so versus what we had researched before. Ty, I don't know if I'm remembering that right, but like that's kind of the point of that. So, we have a deep bench. We don't have any waivers already in. If we add to IR or whatever it is, I'm worried that whatever gains we get with losing our 5th round picks, we're going to end up losing in IR anyway. So like, at that point, what's the point? Like, I'd rather just keep it where it's at. Maybe see how the 5th round goes. What players are added into waivers, and then if we decide that we need to add more IRs, that's fine. But I think Mattoon's situation was an extreme, which is impressive that his team did as well as they did. And again, I haven't had problems with it. Next year, I probably will because I'm talking about it. Tyler Reed, your teams always seem to have problems with IR. Dr. Andrews over there, so I'm sure that you understand, the situation as well. For me, I think that we should keep it the same, see how the 5th round, thing goes as far as losing that, and see where waivers are. but only again because I haven't had that big of an issue. I mean, I lost Herbert and Andrews, and that was anybody else was relatively negligible, and we had a deep enough bench that I could figure it out going forward. So, but I haven't had the extreme side that Mattoon had. So, Mattoon, if you want to chirp in as far as
I
like
think
how that
I-
affected
I
I'll
actually
chirp in.
didn't. I didn't even bring
management.
this rule up. Ty called me and he said, "Hey, this came up." And brought it up to me, and I like the idea. Obviously, having been in those shoes of even if we go to 3 and making 2 of those actually IR, we already what was that after year 1 increased it to 2 when we made them out versus IR. Was that right, Ty? Is that what we did?
It was already 2, but it was strictly IR and not out ability.
Yep.
And then
So
Burns ran into it where he had 2 or 3 guys that were out, couldn't start a tight end, and didn't want to drop somebody because he's like, I got 3 guys that are out. I don't
Yep.
want to drop anybody for this tight end. Can we please make IR out eligible? So we did agree to that.
Yep. So here's and actually, ironically, it's Burns and he's not here. But I don't remember who was playing, but Burns had that week this year where he had his whole starting roster was on bye, and then he was also on IR. He also had like 2 or 3 guys on IR. And so I do like, not that ever, like we can't predict bye weeks and we can't predict the future of scheduling. So his team could be loaded, but maybe all of his wide receivers and Cowboys all have the same bye week next year. If he's got 3 guys on IR, he legitimately can't start a full lineup. And so I do like the idea of if you have guys that are legitimately on IR, not just out for the week, on IR, maybe it's 2 IR and 1 out. I don't know, but just an idea.
Yeah, I mean,
But
to be fair,
again, I can't. Sleeper does not monitor that. I put it in there as out and IR, which then
Yep.
becomes somebody has to monitor it, and it also becomes
Yep.
a pain in my ass.
Yep.
yeah, I mean, to be fair, towards the end of the year, I had both Herbert and Andrews both on IR officially, strictly, and we all know that there was other players who were considered out. Now, management of that aside, is that I had built a deep enough bench. I had moved players around. I traded for Isaiah Likely. I moved things around. I think that's kind of the point. Like, yes, you can't predict next year's bye weeks, right? But you can, at the beginning of the year, you can look at that and you can say, okay, that's something I'm going to have to look at. And then if you get enough injuries, you're like, oh crap, I'm going to have to trade somebody. You're going to have to make some moves. That's the whole point of Dynasty. Like that, like, does it suck? I mean, yeah, a little bit, but at the same time, if you want to win that week, you got to make the moves. You got to talk to people. You got to see what's out there. You got to try and shift and wheel and deal. And if you can't, then you got to consider dropping somebody for a waiver wire guy. Like that's so to me, that's just part of the game. Like I'm not worried as much about that. I mean, that sucks for Burns, but he easily could have either moved a pick or maybe downgraded and gotten a pick if that's what he felt like his team needed. There's lots of options still available to him if he just wants to stay pat and just be screwed for that week. That's also an option to him. Like I don't think that that's necessarily something that is the biggest thing. I guess. But my biggest thing would be keeping your studs, right? You want to make sure that you keep your studs. And Matuna, whether you brought it up or not, I don't really care. I know it affected you the most. And being able to keep your studs on roster and not just absolutely get hammered by things, that sucks. So
I lean towards add IR spots. My argument for is I don't want to get hurt twice. Like if I lose Burrow, if I lose Nick Chubb, whoever it is for the whole year, and I stash him on IR, great. If I lose another guy and now he's eating up a bench spot, like that sucks. I know Mattoon dealt with it. I think if, as has been suggested, additional IR spots are IR only for guys who are out for an extended period of time and not just 1 week at a time or whatever, game in the system we could do. I think that makes sense. I think odds are most of us aren't using those spots. They're there for catastrophe type years. And then it at least gives you the flexibility to make a trade to add a player. Because like Mattoon lost Chubb. If he wants to go and add a guy like Kyron Williams or Raheem Mostert or whoever, he shouldn't have to clear one of his injured guys to make space for him, he should be able to say, hey, Undy, I'll give you a 2nd-round pick for Terry McLaurin, whatever it is. And, he should have that flexibility. You shouldn't be losing the player and losing the flexibility. Then you're just getting dinged twice, and that sucks.
I'd be fine adding one IR specific spot, but that's just another thing to keep track of too. And
Again, I think we just got to be adults on it is the big thing.
Yep. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, just make sure that
We all know, like,
Sure.
hey, you're either gonna have a terrible year like Ty's had in the past and I had this year. And I think Andy hit it dead on the head is like kind of where I was at a couple points this year is I'd cut JT and Chubb all on IR at the same time. And then I had other guys, Ayuk, Christian Kirk, random guys going out for weeks, Najee going out for a week, and so at some point Cam Akers tears his ACL or his Achilles right when he's starting to look over good in Minneapolis. But it's like, well, who do I drop out of these studs to go, pick up somebody or make a trade for Jacobs who doesn't play either? So thanks, Nolan.
All right. So I'll put a poll out for, I think we're all in agreement that one extra IR spot would be max. Yeah. Specifically IR for one.
I think,
I would say
I think
2
that's the minimum.
only
I
because
think one is the minimum, is what the discussion is.
I would
Okay,
say
so
my argument for 2 is because they're not going to get used unless you absolutely need them. So it doesn't hurt to add 2. It would have helped Mattoon a lot this year, and I don't know how in favor I am of helping Mattoon, but maybe it'll help me next year. So that's my thought in adding the 2 instead of the 1. I'm not going to die on that hill, but that's where I would lean.
So I would say the poll would be between 1 and 2.
yep, that's fine. I put up a poll for 1 to 2 for IR spots. They must be IR specific. So the first,
I'm
the
good with that.
two that we have can be out. If we add anything additional, they must be IR.
Yeah, and to be fair, that's NFL designated IR, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So I'll put that poll up. Scrapping 5th round is going to be gone pending major objection from the others. IR spot / the out spot, just figure your shit out. NFL draft is late April. We're going to start the draft May 2nd. I put that on Sleeper. We'll start that morning. Matt has requested a 12-hour clock for that. He did say 8 would work. He tends to get up early, go to work. And he said concrete for 10 or 12 hours. And he doesn't want to be screwed. He said if we do agree on an 8-hour clock, he's more than willing to send me a handful of picks of, hey, here's who I would take. But realistically, that would only affect him if somebody gets on and drafts at 7 or 7:30 as soon as the clock opens, and then he gets hit. He's not home till 7.
Yeah, we've moved quick enough. I don't think that's going to change much to allow for him to actually make his picks and not have to send you a fucking list and then still get a guy he probably didn't want. So,
well, I
add a
mean,
few hours.
if he's the only guy, like, can't you just pause the draft and wait till he picks? Is that hard to do?
I can do that too and pause it strictly for Matt if he gets to the end of his pick.
I mean, I feel like that would be better than making it just 12 for everybody. Not that anyone's really going to use 12, but
Well,
Yeah,
but
we
then
don't even own a 1st or a 2nd this year, so I think it's a moot point.
but here's the other point. Andrew, to your point though, if per se Burns, he couldn't get on tonight because he had coworkers that he needed to cover stuff for. So all of a sudden he's working late tonight. He doesn't get his pick in. He texts me now and he's like, shoot, I missed my pick because it's an 8-hour clock. I got stuck at work late. Do I allow him to also have it? Do I pause it for everybody at the end?
I mean, it stops overnight, doesn't it? There's like a bracket of time that it counts and then it stops counting.
Right.
I mean, is the plan to just let it run and skip someone's pick? Is that or would I feel like we would probably give just about anybody a break
Right. So
if it
I just
happened. But
right. But if we're going to give anybody a break, what's the difference between an 8 to 12 hour clock then? Opposed to me having to go in and pause it and saying, all right, well, Matt needs it. So I'm going to pause it for Matt. So then if somebody else texts me and says, hey, I need 4 extra hours, I have to give it to them. Right.
I think the
Sure.
draft last year was all 60 picks were done in like 2.5 days. So, and
Yeah.
we do the draft in May, so we've got until the end of August.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we could almost do 24 hours at that point.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
okay.
and the other thing realistically is, Matt goes to bed at 9 o'clock and the clock doesn't stop. And realistically, he goes, I could get up at 4 in the morning before I go to work, take my pick and move on. But if his clock starts at 9 at night and he's already in bed, he just wasted an hour or two of his clock. And then if he has a big day the next day and he doesn't get his pick in the morning, he's screwed too. So I don't know. I would say just throw it to the 12-hour clock and call it good.
That's fine.
No, Nolan. He does not have a first or second. He has a third this year. So it really doesn't matter. But we put a 12-hour clock on it, we call it good.
The very important 3rd round pick. He's got to really think about it.
I mean, and like
The,
Andy
the,
said, I
the
think
timing
we've
doesn't
done-
really matter because regardless,
It doesn't.
we're gonna fly through, especially if we're going to only 4 picks.
Yeah,
Well, not
So
this
think
year.
about
We'd
that
go to
too.
4. We'd go to
Yeah.
4 picks in 2026 because that's when I
But-
froze.
Right,
But
but eventually
Andy's
we're going
point
to be going
stands.
through and doing it faster anyway. So if we
Right.
end up hitting a snag where we're stuck for an extra 12 hours, does it really make a difference? No.
No, we'll all
I
just
agree.
whine at each other and send 700 gifts,
Yep.
right?
and then I will be disappointed in our chat, but it'll be fine. All right, we're starting May 2nd, 12-hour clock. Moving on. That was enough of that. We had talked about dropping a bench spot. Everybody seemed open to it at one point, phasing it out, waiting until this meeting to figure out if we wanted to do it. But now it seems like we want to add an IR spot to help with the bench spot. So I imagine people are changing their mind on dropping a bench spot.
Yeah, I think we
I'd like to keep the bench.
add IR. We got to give it a year and see how it looks before we drop the bench. At least we have to wait and see.
Because originally we're dropping the bench for the sake of helping the waiver wire. There's 12 more guys on waiver. If you have a bunch of guys on buy, you have to flip guys over, which means people are going in and out. You're trading. There's more movement.
Yeah, but I mean, we just made arguments that says that that's not necessarily something that shouldn't happen in conjunction also with injuries. So I would say wait a year, see how the injuries work, see how the bench spots work, and then if we want to drop it after that, we can. I'd say table it.
I think one of the reasons that we tabled it last year when it came up was because this year was the first year that we had 2-year guys rolling off of the taxi, and we thought that there might be an impact from that. I don't know about you guys. I don't feel like that really changed anything. So while I admit I don't know which guy I would cut, and I'm happy to keep holding all 10 of my bench players, I do think that the main reason we had paused the decision making was to see how that played out, and I don't feel like it made a difference. I feel like if anything, adding an IR spot makes waivers even thinner because then a couple more guys can be added when guys get hurt. So I would be okay with dropping the bench if we to 9. I think one of the other agenda items is maybe adding a starting roster spot, which would change my opinion, but that might just make other problems.
So
I can't.
So hold on, Boyer, real quick. So let's add that into this conversation. I had a couple people say, hey, should we add a flex starting in 2025, 2026? In the next couple of years, people will be able to adjust to it. I don't think you really need to adjust to it because like we've said, our benches are deep. You've either got the guys or you don't have the guys. But at the same time, the bottom guys that have sold off now have to find an extra player to play in their starting lineup. So this would give them an extra year to figure out whether or not they have enough guys or if they want to continue tanking for another year. So throw adding a potential flex in there with the drop a bench spot.
So
Boyer,
Here-
back to you.
I
Shut up.
understand.
Shut up, Andy.
I was just gonna ask
Okay,
why.
go ahead.
Like, I understand the reasoning between drop a bench spot to just try to get a little bit more waiver churn, get a little bit better talent on waivers so that there's more to look at. Cause every time I go to waivers, I'm like, I've never heard of any of these guys. So maybe that helps with that. But like, what is the motivation for adding another starting spot? Just to help the guys who pay more attention and make it harder for people like Fryer?
Got him.
Yeah, I don't suck because I'm not paying attention.
He's just bad.
Just
Me
I'm
too.
just not good at it.
Me too, Fryer. It's fine.
Fryer, I'll switch my co-manager for you, and between the two of us, you'll pay attention. I've got the championship roster, like we're good to go, right? Like you
We'll start a full roster.
All right. Anyway, I think it was Lisak and Burns. So Lisak, do you have I think you were one of the two that brought it up. I think Burns was
Did
another. I think it was you. And
Yeah.
Burns.
I don't
After-
remember that.
I think it was after one of was it? I don't know. There were at least two people that messaged me
Sure.
and said, "Hey, this would be." Maybe it was Nolan. Nolan.
And no one cares about that guy anyway, right?
I'm kind of leaning towards leaving it as it is, but I could be swayed one way or the other.
I don't want to be swayed. I'd like to leave it as it is, but I mean, I'm open to having the conversation. It got brought up.
If nobody's making the argument for, I think we're all good.
It might have been Burns and Nolan then. Burns was one fault, but if he's the only one that's looking for it, then I think we're good to just get rid of that conversation.
Well, without Burns on the chat, if you want to give him a chance to just give his reasoning, in Messenger, like in a no GIF, 2-hour time period or whatever, then we can at least hear what the reasoning was, and then we can vote on it if there's a legit reason. But it doesn't sound like anybody here in the video chat has the legit reason. But I don't want to say I would just want to just get rid of it just because he couldn't make the chat, because I don't feel like that's fair. Does that
I
make
feel
sense?
like we've had pretty good competitive league the way it is. I don't
Yeah,
know
I mean,
if we
I
need
still
to
have
be
to
changing too much.
Yeah, like I still have to make, like everyone seems to be making roster moves and trying to figure out who to start and who not to without that flex spot. It's not like rosters are just set and nobody has to make decisions,
Yeah.
So
And if
I think it's okay.
if we add a starting spot, like if we added a starting spot and knocked the bench down to 9, then rosters would stay the same size. It would be harder to field a starting lineup week to week. If we expand the bench or even just keep it at 10 bench with one more starting spot, then everybody gets to pick up a player and waivers get even thinner. So I feel like that kind of makes that issue worse, or it makes it harder to dodge bye weeks and injuries and whatever.
So
I think you'd also have to consider adding, at that point, my vote would be minimum 2 IR spots instead of minimum 1.
Yeah.
On that vote. Now we'd be voting for 2, 3, 4, like, because you gotta have options for that next flex.
Andy, I think you brought up the fact of you scour the waivers and there's not a whole lot out there unless you're trying to add your 13th quarterback to your bench. But I just did a quick dive and there's 13 taxi spots unused right now. And so I don't even know how many of the, what is that, 6 times 12, 72 spots total are even going to get bumped off of taxi this year because they've got to get moved up. I can do that later. But I think especially if we cut one bench spot and just knowing all that, I think these waivers are going to really start turning more, or people are going to make less moves because they're just going to hold on to their guys because they don't want to lose them to someone else. I don't know which way it's going to go, but to your point, clearly people aren't going and doing deep dives on rookies just to stash them on their taxis.
And just so, speaking of that, just so everybody is aware again, if you move somebody to your out or your IR and you have open taxi spots, you can pick up rookies and we can move them to your taxi. So like I know that 4 of you message me regularly and like, hey, flip somebody to my taxi. I just want to make sure everybody is aware that that is a possibility for all you guys with empty taxi spots during the year. You can pull a rookie from free agency and throw them into your taxi. As long as you bring them onto your roster, then I'll move them down. So anybody that's not clear on that, there it is. So I think we're pretty
That's-
stalemated. Are we pretty stalemated? Just hold out on the drop a bench. And then I think unless Burns has a compelling argument, we are not adding a flex.
Yeah, it sounds like we're not adding the flex, and I think it's at least worth a vote for adding a bench because of what I'm hearing, or dropping the bench because it sounds like there's differing opinions on it.
All right. You guys are gonna love polls later. But if everybody's on here, if everybody was at least I
Thank
would
you,
have,
Andy. I really wanted to laugh at that too.
if
Just
everybody was
make a
on
whole
here,
ass survey and email everybody.
Yeah, there we go.
listen, I just want everybody to have a, I would like everybody to have a say, and since there's 3 managers not on here,
Plus 2
Which
halves.
actually is fairly impressive. I thought there'd be like 4
Hey,
actually on here anyway.
I would have
I
murdered
just want to
all
make
of
a
them.
note that 25% of our league has to have a partner managing the roster.
I don't know that Underhill's partner manages the roster. He just looks at it. He doesn't have access to it unless Undy figured it out.
Is Undy frozen down there?
I don't know. He looks like me most of the time. No, he's not frozen.
Yeah, he still can't get in,
It's
so
poker face.
he still can't get in. So I am one manning it this year.
I got you. That's about the best idea for you, maybe. All right. So add a flex. I'm gonna reach out to Burns. Otherwise, we're dropping that bench spot. We'll throw something out. All right. I got 2 more issues, and then we'll talk about Boyer. Just so the elephant in the room knows that it's still coming. I promise it's happening.
So 3 more issues. I get it.
Well, 2 more small issues and then Boyer. All right, so this is where I think Lisak, this one's you, where we move bottom 8 to max points 4. Right? You were one of the ones that proposed that.
Yeah.
So moving the bottom 8 to max points 4, still doing $25 for the 5th place team when get half their money back, but it doesn't matter in the end. Bottom 8 that don't make playoffs, still just go to max points 4. And I think the argument was that if you're in the bottom 2 or 3 of max points 4,
Why wouldn't you throw that game?
what's the benefit of getting
Exactly.
5th
Yeah.
place?
Completely agree. I don't think it changes anything. It makes the consolation bracket more competitive. We haven't
Yeah,
had that
there's-
issue yet, but you could. And there's no
There's
like,
zero, now you have 0 incentive to tank no matter what.
yeah, exactly.
You want to go for the money.
So
Like,
here's
if Undy had made consolation, which he was somewhat close to doing, and he had his own pick this year, be it 1st or 2nd overall, there's 0 reason that $25 motivates him to get the 7th or 8th overall pick instead of the 2nd. Like, that hurts him way more long run just to try to win $25, which he might not even win. So why not just bench your team in that 1st round? I don't think it hurts anything to change it to max points 4 for the bottom 8.
still, I have one thing on this, and not to go on a total, but that's under the assumption that you have your own pick. Very few of us have our own 1st round picks, and maybe even 2nd round picks. And so here's my concern. We're talking about lack of trading and lack of picking up and things like that. If you lock it into max points 4, Burns and myself this year, who were fighting for playoff spots, probably no one's going to want to trade for our 1st because they're going to be automatically 8 through 12 if it was this year, because you're going to look at it and say, no matter what you do in that consolation round, you're going to be pick 8 or higher. If you sneak into playoffs, you're 9 through 12. If you don't, you're pick 8. having this gives it a wild card factor of if I lost, I would have been the fourth pick in the sixth pick in the constellation. You know what I mean? So it gives it a little bit more of a wild card to it in a
That's a
guessing thing.
fair enough point, but the difference is if you win, then you would be 2 picks higher. I don't think that's making trade values that different. As opposed to Undy, if he had been in there, regardless of if it's his pick or not, like the difference between a first or second overall and 8th if you win the consolation bracket is huge, and especially if your team, Paul had his own first round pick. So if Paul had managed to win any games this year and make consolation, then, why, like he has no motivation to win that game and try to do anything. And the poor guy, he could do with winning the consolation, win that $25 and pay us all our $3 back.
It was 4
So-
me either way.
So here's my question as far as doing like top 8, because I'm a proponent of top 8. I think Andy's brought up a pretty good point. What if we tier it? So the bottom 4 in standings, and then the second 4 in standings, and then it's on points max 4 as far as draft position goes.
Because you'd still have people tanking in the middle of the season then to try to get to the
Because-
bottom 4.
Right, because the problem is with standings is what we found year one is
That's a good point.
Nolan tried to get under me, which he did in year one. I had by far the lowest max points 4. Nolan got under me in record, and he took the 101. I got put with the 102.
Nice choice of words, buddy.
That's right.
Hey, Nolan's here. I guess my point is that so like the bottom 4 in standings, it goes to points max 4. That's what we do now. The second 4 then go against each other in points max 4.
But here's the thing.
Which-
If-
But
if-
then you're gonna
means
have
that-
people throwing games, setting
Yep.
lineups with, even if it's active players, like, oh, well, I'm gonna play Hassan Haskins this week in a week that Henry's healthy because I don't want Josh Jacobs in because, well, maybe he's injured. I'm worried about that hamstring he tweaked last week because I want to finish in that bottom 4 so I get a good pick. Like
the whole thing was avoiding record.
undercuts max points 4 because then you have incentive to lose games again.
But I guess my point is that like that middle 4 is in the playoff hunt. So and
I
Vern's
wasn't. I mean, I was in fifth.
Some of them
fifth
will be,
place
but
for a
not
while.
all of them.
I was like right
Three
on
of
the
them.
cusp this year, and I was debating. I mean, I wasn't gonna do it, but I'm like, I could really use to be in the bottom 4 and not have a chance to win one game and then end up in 7th.
Sure, but you could also you could have sold off more of your bench guys. You could have traded off more of your points max 4 guys to get to
It doesn't
both
matter
lose,
if
to both lose
if I win.
and
yeah.
lose max points 4. You could have done
I
both.
guess the
Like you
whole
could have
point
gone
is-
either way, and you decided to do neither. Why would this
It
make
just-
that decision any different?
So
This
that's
just
Hold on,
completely
let Andrew talk.
dumps off. This gets rid of any incentive to tank, and it brings back the incentive to actually try to get that 5th place.
So I'm gonna say something here. When Stu's not gonna like the fact that I'm bringing this up, but when he traded me my own first this year, I was currently outside of the playoffs. I liked that pick because I knew that I was either gonna get into the playoffs or I had a chance that if I was in consolation, I could lose the first round. So my pick had a 8-pick range at that point, which is why I wanted to do his deal versus 2 of the other deals I had in place. Well, if Burns lost, he and I, so it could have been 5 through 12 is my point. So to me, that pick was way more enticing than other picks that I had that I knew for a fact were playoff picks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so essentially having your pick is what could have caused you to tank in the consolation.
No, I'm just saying I knew that no matter what, I was either going to be in the middle, I had a chance to be kind of middle front, or I was winning. Does that make sense?
winning.
Or you could have
I
won
was-
the consolation and got $25 or
Right,
lost
which
and
is
got
Andy's
seventh
point.
place.
Made
So
every
you could
aspect
be in
of
the
that.
middle too.
It
Right,
made
Andy's
every
point is-
aspect of that positive. Does that make sense?
Right, Andy's point is that you having your own pick, you have the $25 doesn't mean anything to you. You would rather tank in that constellation to try and drop down to
I
the
want it.
105.
I want it.
Right, but that's his point. His point is that that's an option to a manager, right? But if it's points max 4, then now that is not as possible because points max 4 probably puts you at almost a 106 or 107 guaranteed anyway. So you might as well go for the constellation.
107, 108 guaranteed.
Whatever.
It's not.
but
It's
you
not even.
understand
It's
what I'm
not
trying to
even.
say.
It's not even just the option of tanking. I would have actively been rooting against my team even if I wasn't trying to blow the game because I don't care about getting 7th or 8th place. I'd rather have a better pick.
Yeah, I get
Like,
what
I
Matoon's
was-
saying.
Yeah.
Like the point that he's making is valid. That is a scenario, but it's just the other, like the opposite of well, if Undy had made it and won a game, but like from Matoon's perspective, you know, his team was good and had a lot of points for it. And so getting a higher pick is just gravy that he doesn't really need, or whoever
That's a
it
good
is in
point.
this scenario. So like the whole max points 4 thing is to try to get the lower teams, the worst teams, the better draft picks. And also if Matoon with a good team wins consolation, that's a solid end of the year for him. Then he gets to argue that he won a playoff bracket once. And the
I'm
other side,
undefeated on championship Sundays.
the other side of the coin though, with a team like Undy, if he squeaks into the consolation, like he's only happy if he loses. Like I don't think $25 is motivating to him with a team that's bottom 2 or 3 in max points 4, and knowing that losing puts him with a really high pick and winning puts him many picks farther back in the first round. I don't disagree with Matoon's point. I just think that it still doesn't outweigh the other side of it.
No, I agree with you. Like I see both sides of it as well. I think as far as, and I'll be honest, there's people out here that they will only trade for certain people's picks right now. You know what I mean? And so it basically, if you had a semi-successful year, odds are your picks are going to be devalued moving forward. Does that make sense? Like that's the only thing is you take that wild card factor out.
I mean, I still think it makes sense. Picks are valued as they're valued, and it makes sense to give better picks to the whoever is the lower max points for. Like Andy was saying, it kind of makes sense.
So I mean, then Mattoon, what we would have to do, right? Because we bank on who's going to be bad the next couple of years, as
Yep.
good managers would do. I'd say I'd call myself a good manager because I'm a champion. But we look at, all right, maybe who's going to be bad that year, right? And we hope that they just miss playoffs so that we can have a bottom 6 pick.
Yeah.
Their max points 4 could still be good, right? Or we look at, all right, well, maybe me and Boyer beat out Matt the next 2 years, and Matt's going to be in consolation or lower. We could take a shot on Matt being bottom 6.
Yep.
We could take a shot on Kelly dropping off or Andy dropping off or maybe me. I could be bad. Which probably is the most likely scenario that I'm the bad one. So take my picks. But I understand what Matoon's saying and the fact that like we aim to figure out who's gonna miss playoffs, right? Like, oh, I don't think that they're gonna do it. I mean, they could trade for people, they can make things work, whatever. It's all a guessing game at some point. But at the same time, I see where bottom max points 4, the bottom 8. Honestly, it's a guessing game at that point anyway. Because if you draft a decent 2 or 3 rookies and they sit on your taxi, but they're not helping you get to consolation or helping you get to playoffs, but they're still putting up decent points on your taxi, those max points 4 are going to change regardless.
So I'm gonna ask a question. If we were to change this year, like going in retrospect, would the draft order have changed at all?
Yes,
One,
I think
one
Matt.
Probably a
I
little
think
bit.
I think Matt's goes from like 6 to like 7 or 8.
So it would be I'm just looking at it right now. Yeah, it'd be 6 to 8, so 2 spots. And
Yeah.
someone who was contending for the playoffs or attempting to.
Yeah, and if that's the only thing that's moving is the potential 8 pick to a 6, like I don't see why that would be holding us up from changing it.
I guess that's my point is
Yeah.
why would you change it though?
Now, Andy.
So then we have incentive to try to actually win $25 and not incentive to lose.
Now, Andy, if I'm right, your perspective is that it incentivizes the 5th person to try and get to the bottom 4. Yeah.
For your situation.
Yeah,
Right.
potentially.
But in just total max 4, it doesn't.
Right.
Okay.
Because like Undy's team won enough games to be pushing for consolation. You know, if he had beaten Lisak a couple of times, they could have switched. And Undy's max points 4 had him with the 2nd overall pick. So obviously he didn't own his own first, and that changes things. But in that scenario, like there's a big incentive for him to not make the consolation if his team is not very good but has won some games.
Okay. I'm a proponent of top 8 points max for them. And no tier.
Should we add it to the survey?
Matt
I'd be
says,
curious. I'd be curious to go back one more year. Like I'm just curious what, truly what the ramifications of this are.
I
will
don't
say-
even
jump
care
2
if it
people.
changes anything. I just
Yeah.
want it feels like the consolation bracket needs something and it doesn't. It doesn't. I have no, like, if I'm trying to get a better pick, I have no incentive to be in the consolation bracket, let alone try to win if I own my own first.
So suck better.
Then
Well,
I'll-
and I guess
yeah.
that's
We're trying
for me,
real hard
since
not to incentivize that.
I guess Andy
said
keeps throwing
suck
out my
better.
name. So I knew that Andy had my first round pick. I was doing everything I possibly could from week 10 on, trying to win as many games because, one, he's in my division. So why would I want to get him a better pick? So I'm kind of on the opposite side. I'm kind of siding with Mattoon. If that makes sense.
But
Well,
It does.
only because you didn't own your first pick.
But
Right.
Because
that's
if
what I was
you
gonna
did
say.
own it, you would. There's no way in hell you would want to win that first consolation game.
No, but then if he had it though, he wouldn't have been buying Connor. He wouldn't have tried to get
Right.
those players. He would have naturally just tanked himself to the bottom 4 without
Fair.
buying players, right? He would have played the last 4 weeks differently.
Fair enough.
I mean, and that's the thing about trading, right? Like if I trade you my pick and I know I don't have it, my goal is to win this year because I'm not getting a low pick.
Yep.
And my goal is to keep you out of the bottom 3. Like the goal is to win. And
Yeah.
I understand where Lee Sack's coming from because I understand that you could go from being 5th to being 8th, which sucks. But also what we just talked about, if your max points 4, we just said Matt's 6 right now. He could have moved to 8. And we also said, well, it's not a big deal. What's the difference between 6 and 8? It's not a big change.
Well, but 2 years ago, or was it last year? Jer Fry had like the 2nd lowest max points for, and they were fighting for the playoffs. So they had a situation where they were either going to be the 2nd pick or what
Or
ended up
second
being the
place.
11th,
Fine, I
the
looked.
11th, the
It was
11th
5th
pick.
or 6th. It was 5th or 6th because Ty and I went back and looked at this.
No, they had their max points for was really low.
Yeah, but it was 5th or 6th.
There's 4 teams worse than them.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's sad.
But, well, I mean, they did trade for guys at the end of the season, so I could see
Yeah.
that.
Because
But at some point, they
we
were
went back
they
and looked at
were
this.
like
Yeah.
4 weeks before playoffs. But that's where I first thought of it. It was 2 years ago. I was thinking, well, this is a huge range, which is fine if that's what we want to do. But yeah, I don't know.
And to be fair with how we play like divisions and wild card and stuff, it affords itself to a big range of, where if like a division is real bad, like terrible, then you could have a big range. The division winner could win the championship or get to the semis, and or if they don't win their own division and therefore don't get to the playoffs because they're not getting a wild card because they have a crappy record, now all of a sudden points max 4. If it's that low, if it's that bad of a division, I mean, you're talking just a giant group. Are we
Yeah.
laughing about something, guys?
No,
What's it called?
It's driving Ty crazy that you're saying points max 4 instead of max points 4.
did he leave? Do we offend him? Boyer, come back. Boyer,
He didn't ever get to know.
Boyer.
I guess last point
So,
though.
so
if
Lisek,
he-
it would have been
if-
3.
if-
It would have been 3.
Okay, yeah, it was down there. I guess the point is that we're leaving the door open for someone who sucks to not get a good pick if they actually keep their first. Like,
Yeah.
which is, it doesn't logically make sense to me, but I could understand why you'd want the I don't know, different options, like just not to be black and white. So I'm not going to be that upset if we keep it the way it is. Just pointing that out.
I understand the reasoning behind it 100%, like with where your thoughts are at. It's just a matter of, do we just want to make that, like you said, kind of black and white and just take see where the chips lie? I mean, all you Bears fans are sure are happy that the Packers lost, but at the same time they won a playoff game. You know what I mean? So that's where you kind of have this, and their draft pick just got worse because of it.
Fuck the Packers. We don't care.
So does it make
did you
sense
double
for the
doink on Twitter?
does it make sense for the first 2 losers of the consolation to actually go to the what we have it now, the top 6, or does it make sense to just drop them to 4 and 5? Or 5 and 6.
The way it's set up now, they would go 5-6, right?
No,
the way
they
it's set up now is
go
they
into
go
the.
into the bottom 6.
I think Nolan dropped to 4 because he lost.
Yeah.
And Nolan was in the consolation.
Yes. But if he would have won, he would have been either 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
See, and that's where, like, for me, like, I don't own my first at all because I always trade it away. So for me to be in that spot, I don't really have an input either way.
Sure.
Yeah, it's hard, Lisa, because you're right. I mean, we added that change of that technically 7th, 8th game to get mixed in with the bottom 6 so that it was, hey, if you do lose first round.
Yeah, that makes, I guess
got a
it
shot.
would,
Yeah.
if we did tier it, I mean, you still have the chance of like
Yeah.
trying to tank to get to the bottom 4, but
Yeah. I mean, and
But
you're 100% right. Like, let's say Undy snuck in, right? Undy had a terrible team this year. No offense, Undy. You get in. I mean, don't forget
But it's not a terrible team because I was able to sneak in. That's the issue.
The worst person is playing the person who was 1 win or a tiebreaker out of the playoffs. Odds are they're going to win anyways. You know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, I get
theoretically.
if I had snuck in ahead of Nolan, which was close.
Yeah.
I know that I would have been actively rooting against my team winning because I'd rather have the
For
4th or 5th pick than the 7th or 8th.
Yeah, makes sense.
I wouldn't have tanked or however that would look, but I would have liked to have rooted for my team to win. But
even Skip Bayless talks for his entire show.
Can we do next topic? Whatever, Andy,
I-
you know what it is, right?
I was
Yeah,
gonna
I
say,
got
I
the
think
link.
Andy and I both know him.
Yeah, I looking through, Ty's kind of gone out of order, so it's hard to know for sure.
We're going to talk about poaching taxi guys next. If
That's
anybody
what I
wants
thought
to
was
come
next,
with
but I
Mattoon, we've
figured
had
I'd
that
wait for that one.
conversation. Mattoon or Andy, jump in on it.
Go ahead,
Go.
Mattoon, you pitch it.
All right. So the thought of, again, trying to get people moving more, people holding on to their taxi guys for 2 years and then never doing anything with them and eventually cutting them, is Ty drafts Puka in the 5th round this year. And because he thinks T. Higgins is going to play and he's got all these stud wide receivers like George Pickens, who he's ready to put into the Hall of Fame, he leaves Puka on his taxi. Puka should clearly have been on his active roster starting week 2, let's call it. And so we thought about treating the taxi more like a true NFL practice squad. And so you can go and pick other guys as taxis. Now, we got to set some parameters to this. You can protect people. What does the picking look like? And so some of the thoughts for group discussion now that Ty's off the phone is, Paul, I'm going to use Khalil Shakir. That was my guy. I kept trying to get him from you as soon as the draft was over. You drafted him in the 4th. I can say, Paul, I want to pick him, and I'm going to give you 1 round earlier. I've got to give you a 3rd round pick. You now have the decision to make of, do you take that 3rd round pick or do you move them up to your active roster? So just something, there's a lot more ways that we can go into this. Ty, you maybe have more notes on it, but just a way to.
So what I had kind of talked about is the ability. We have 6 taxi spots, and a lot of guys have a lot of picks. And Sky Moore got left on taxi year 1. Had he been good and he got stuck on taxi still, like, that's a guy. Problem is he's a 1st rounder, so we'd have to figure out how to compensate a 1st round. But if it's a 2nd round pick, and I got Amon-Ra from Nolan first, he was drafted in the 2nd. If I put Amon-Ra back onto my taxi when I get him from Nolan, and I just leave him there, right? And Amon-Ra's a stud, and I just leave him there, somebody could come in and say, Tyler, you're going to put your best player on your taxi. I'll pay you a 1st right now to get him off your taxi. Kind of like an NFL team could poach a guy from a practice squad. Because if you're going to leave your best player on taxi, and I understand that the goal is that you're losing games, you're whatever, but max points for is max points for regardless if they're on your taxi or not. So like, why leave your best players on your taxi? I get, okay, I've got a great roster built and I can't move them up. If I can't move Amon-Ra off of my taxi, like, who am I holding on to? Who am I holding on to? Jonathan Mingo, Terrence Marshall? Because guess what? I love Terrace Marshall, and you guys can all fuck off. But that's my guy, and I didn't want to drop him because I thought he might be good, but I moved him up too early. A.T. Perry, I still have hope that he's going to be good. Jared Fry picked him up, but I still have hope that he's going to be good next year. But I moved him up too early, and I didn't want to drop him, so I could have left my best taxi guy on my taxi because I don't want to drop a guy like A.T. Perry. At some point, you're going to want to move your best guy off, right? But at the same time, and then we compensate you, right? So if Amon-Ra's a 2nd rounder and somebody came at me, they'd have to offer me at least a round up. If it's a 1st round pick on your taxi, we'd have to figure out how to adjust 1st round pick to a 1st and a 2nd or whatever the case may be. But I also said that on the understanding that the taxi squad is there for a reason. You can have maybe 2 protected spots. Your best 2 players that you like can be protected. But if I'm sitting on Romeo Dobbs that's tearing it up, Jaden Reed that's tearing it up, Puka Nacua on my taxi, Zamir White at the end of the season that's tearing it up. I'm sitting on 6 guys that are all playing well, and I don't want to move any of them up because I don't want to make the playoffs. But like, if max points for is a thing, right? So all these guys still count against you regardless. So why are we not considering moving these guys up? So Andy, you have had your hand raised so nicely. You can talk.
I just feel like this is a really complicated way of offering a trade to somebody. If I want your 3rd round draft pick and I want to offer you a 2nd round pick for it, I can just submit that in Sleeper.
Right. But here's the other thing though. If your guy's being poached, you have 1st dibs at moving him up and keeping him, right?
Sure.
But
I mean, I
it-
understand the nuance to it, but that's effectively what's happening, and it just makes everything way more complicated. Like, I'm just gonna say it like it is. Like, this is gonna benefit people like Mattoon and Nolan, and really hurt people like Matt and Colin Kelly, who aren't near as active. And would I love for everybody to be as active on the waivers and roster scouring that as Mattoon is? Absolutely. Do I think that this is going to change it? I think it's just going to make that even more lopsided in their favor. And like, I'm not against there being ways for people to get an advantage. That's fine. Like, that's not the issue, but it just feels like an overcomplicated way of offering somebody a trade. And it's just going to be a lot to have to keep track of somewhere to say, okay, well, these two guys are protected. This guy's a first round pick, so you can't take him, but this guy's a fourth round pick. And now I'm enacting the process of saying third round pick or move them up, and you have 72 hours to do whatever. Like, it just feels like a headache when it's effectively a trade offer at the end of the day.
And I think maybe part of the reason I was in favor of it when Ty brought it up to me is really two reasons. Number one, I think you're right. You do limit it in some way. So you can only go after one steal or something like that. Like, it's either use it or lose it. And probably you're maybe either looking to do it early in the season when you have a guy that maybe you just missed in the draft. Like, he went 2 picks ahead of you. That was your guy. You only had the 402 and he went at the 312. Or Paul, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, but Paul made it very clear he did not want to win games this year. And last year he had Watson in London and a bunch of these guys still sitting on his taxi for halfway through the season. There's no reason they shouldn't have been in his starting lineup, because I don't even know half the guys that were playing wide receiver for him, or if they're still in the league. MVS, although he made a couple catches.
Sorry, David.
So it's just more trying to get people to actually start their best rosters and get some more movement. But I agree though, like, you can't sit there and I can't go to every single person and be like, I'll give you a fourth, I'll give you a fourth, I'll give you a fourth, I'll give you a fourth. You know what I mean? Like, once I use it, in my opinion, it should be done.
to me, we talk about how thin waivers are to start with. And so that's just effectively saying, hey, I have one shot at a waiver from somebody else that they're not using this player. It kind of just came up for the sake of, and honestly, here's the thing. A guy like Matt only has 3 guys on his taxi. So he's effectively already
Protecting too.
secured 2 of the 3 of them. The guys that don't use all 6 taxis. I picked up Dontavian Wicks as a free agent, never even got drafted. So we'd have to put that in somewhere too. Like, oh, he's playing well. He's sitting on my taxi. Somebody wants him. It's got to be a 4th rounder, right? We got to bump it up from a free agency to whatever. But the problem is, some of us, like Andy said, some of us scour it and fill our taxis. Some of us don't. And the problem is, we've talked about multiple times in this already. The waiver is way too thin, and that there's no possibility. So if a guy does have all of these injuries and does have 3 guys on IR already and 3 other guys that are injured, and there's nobody on waivers, where does he go? He can't go anywhere. So it's one shot to take and say, hey, this is my desperate week. I'm going to take a shot on that guy, which is your 5th round pick. I'm going to take him for a 4th. And maybe he could just offer that straight up. But if you tell him no, and everybody else tells him no and says, hey, your team sucks, good luck, then we're going to penalize him because he can't start a full lineup. Otherwise, he's going out and grabbing some schmuck off the street just to put him in the lineup. But I understand the nuance. I understand the complication. It came to me and I thought, how can we make this work? Because we do whine about waivers not being enough. There was enough whining about, we don't have enough IR spots because people are dying. We don't have enough of this. So, like, how do we find that one extra player? And I said, all these guys sit on taxi for 2 years because they're not good. But if like one guy is putting up 6 points a game or 3.5 points a game, and you're like, that's the only way I can go get a guy that's reasonably playable for 5 points today. What's to say that you shouldn't have a chance to at least go throw it out there? I don't know. I'm not adamant to do it. I just thought it would be something different. I thought it'd be something fun, and I thought it'd be a good way to add a possibility of a waiver. Matt Fryer, you looked like you were going to say something real quick before I go back to Mr. Raised Hand Andy over here.
Yeah, man, I love the idea. I think that sounds like a lot of fun. I think there's some nuance that probably needs to be, we need to shake this out a little bit and figure out exactly how to do it. But I love the idea.
Andy, now your turn, I guess.
There's also like, this is more in the weeds, but like, this is going to theoretically be more detrimental to the weaker teams that had the earlier picks. Picks move around enough that that's probably not an issue, but like, if Jer Fry's 4th round pick is the 401, and I expect my 3rd round pick next year to be in the back 4, maybe it won't be, but I can go say, hey, the season's about to start. You have no idea if this guy's good, but I didn't have a 3rd round pick this year, so I couldn't take him. You took him at the 401, so I'm going to move you up a couple of picks and back a year to try to poach him now because you don't want to move him up.
Right. So there would be some nuance to it where we'd have to come up with some rules and some guidelines. But realistically, I would say you can't poach until week 3 or after. So people have a chance to figure it out, because odds are, if your whole team is injured before the season even starts, you're a shitty manager. Because if you're sitting on 6 guys that got injured in preseason and don't try to adjust going into the season, you go into the season with 6 guys starting on IR, there's already a problem. But also, if you're a manager with a whole bunch of earlier picks, the first, the seconds, whatever, odds are your team's not good and you've got 6 bench guys you can get rid of because they're all garbage anyway. And you can move your first up and you can move a second up. But if we protect 2 on the taxi squad or something in that range, you move your 2 firsts up and you sit on your 2 seconds. Those can be your protected players. But once again, I'm mostly throwing it out there. I don't expect an answer to this. I just kind of wanted to talk it out and see where people were at. Because it just came to me and I thought it might be fun to add to the waiver perspective since we all whine that there is none. Mattoon.
So 2 things real quick. The first is, I think if you go back and look at our draft, the amount of picks that actually hit outside of the 1st round are pretty low. And so this is just another way to kind of keep that guessing game going a little bit. But secondly, Ty, correct me if I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
The thought behind this was you have to take that player and put them on your active tax or on your active roster once you have plucked them from the other team, right? Yes. So it's, Andy, kind of to your point, is if someone took somebody at the 402, you're offering them a 3rd, you're going to be anywhere between 310, 312. Okay, yeah, they got a few spots better, right? But now that guy has to actually live on my roster. You know what I mean?
So he has to live on, he has to live on your bench.
Or live on my bench, yeah. So, and where I could see this, I'm going to, kind of use an extreme here, is like, I don't have another quarterback on my roster besides Josh Allen. That's me problem. I figure it out come bye weeks. But some people have 4 quarterbacks on their taxi, clearly they're not playing them. Can I go grab an Aiden O'Connell or whoever it may be, for 1 week? So
I think it's a fun idea. I feel like at the end of the day, it's just a far more complicated way of offering a trade. And if you can't work out a trade with a guy, then it's probably you're trying to get a guy off of Matt's roster and he's just not paying attention.
Do you know how many gifts I've sent to Paul of Shakira over the last 2 years? I'm so happy
that's Paul's prerogative. If he wants to hold him, he should be allowed to do that. He's the one that drafted him, right?
Yep.
I mean, there's one aspect to this, is that we're essentially acting like taxi squads or practice squads, right? Where other teams can sign other players off of a practice squad. And I'm assuming, although I don't really know in the NFL, if the team that has the practice squad player has the ability to match or better the offer to sign them to their active roster. And I think that's probably what this is trying to emulate. So when you say I drafted him, I should be able to have him on my roster. That's not the case in the NFL either. I think that this is an interesting enough mechanic that kind of emulates that. That is interesting. I think it could also force, like if Ty had Puka and just kept on his bench because he just could, I could say, okay, I'll take Puka for a fourth. And if he says, yep, that's fine, then maybe we start like, I don't know, some sort of bidding process or something like that where everybody has a chance to bid, you know, as far as like what they want to give up for Puka, as long as Ty says, I'm declaring I'm not going to keep Puka in that case, or he says, yep, I'll move him to my starting roster and he's his for sure. You know what I'm saying? Like there's definitely nuance to that, but it's a way to force a really good player onto somebody else's bench, which then moves somebody's. They have to drop somebody. Waivers becomes more important. I think it's a good mechanic. We have to work out the minutia, but
And to me,
I think that's the point of it.
and to me, I know that it's not going to go into effect for this year because this is going to be a situation that is going to have to have a lot of nuances and a lot of details worked out before it comes into effect. And I don't think that's going to be hashed out over the course of the next couple months. And so I do think it would have to be something that would even be implemented, talked about over the next year if we wanted to do it, and implemented the following year. So I don't see anything changing this year to start with, but it would give us plenty of time to have that conversation if we want. But I would say essentially you get one poach. So Boyer, to your bidding war, I personally would be against the bidding war. The person moves him up or he doesn't. Whoever the first one that comes to the practice squad says, that's the guy I want. That's the guy that should get him. But you get one poach. And if you miss, you miss. All right. You take your one shot and hope for the best. Or because the problem is, right, like if you take your shot and you make me move him up.
So
And then,
so
and then
Ty,
you
so
turn
Ty,
around- yeah.
So Ty, just to save time, I think you're arguing minutia, and I'm like I'm totally getting you. Like I don't care how the minutia works. I think it's that at the very least you should put this to a vote and say, can we poach from taxi? And if so, then we move on to the minutia. Because the minutia is not going to be discussed and decided here in this chat, right? So right now we have Andy as a dissenter, and I feel
I mean,
like
a lot
a
of this
good
is just
chunk
down
of
to
people
whether
are saying,
Ty
yes,
wants
this
to
is
deal
fun,
with
let's
it.
do it.
Like I'm not against the idea overall. It just sounds like a pain in the ass. Like if Ty's okay with setting up a spreadsheet and figuring out who's done what and who's protected and who's and going through all of that, more power to him. Like I think it's a fun mechanic. I get the reasoning for wanting to do it. It just sounds like a pain in the ass to me is my main thing, but I'm not the one who's going to have to deal with that. That's Ty.
Yeah,
So if
yeah, I
Ty's
just
on
didn't-
board, then more power to him.
Yeah, I just didn't want to discuss minutia when really
Yeah,
the
oh yeah,
vote
I
is going to
support
be
that.
on whether we do it or not, and then we discuss minutia in the chat later. That's all. Like because
Fair point.
Ty, every point that you were bringing up and we're about to bring up, I'm sure, was completely valid. I just didn't want to like waste a bunch of time on that because it sounds like here in the chat or here in the video we're okay with it. It's gonna come to a vote and then we can discuss minutia from there if it passes. But I do think it's a great idea.
Paul
like it.
Andrew, Undy put in the chat that he's still here dealing with bedtime. Players on his team should stay on his team, and he should get the decision on it. Paul or Andrew, quick comments before we move on to our last point.
I have concerns, but I'm kind of on the fence.
Okay.
So
Paul?
minutia.
Yeah, I could be swayed either way. I've been in leagues where you could poach players, and I like it. I've also been in leagues right now where you can't poach players. I like it. I don't really care either way.
I'm not going to make a minimum trades requirement, Underhill. I can't do that. I do appreciate the input from the chat box. So, all right. So the move to bottom max points for the bottom 8, I missed the last little part of that. Did we agree on something there? Are we going to max points for bottom 8, or are we putting that in my survey poll too?
Probably a survey poll. I don't know if there's enough from this.
All right.
to say for sure, considering other people aren't here.
All right. So we've covered all the topics I needed to cover. Honestly, the last couple I didn't expect to go as long as they did, and we did. So here we are. So the last thing we're going to cover is going to Boyer and the pick situation. I personally like the pick situation still in place. I know I've had a conversation with Boyer about it. And I know Boyer's brought in Bagwell to kind of help with this moving forward, and hopefully it's not a problem moving forward. Colin Kelly lost a third rounder. Granted, at that point it was warning third, second, first. So we were at 4-strike system. Now we're at a 3-strike system. Boyer, I'm going to let you say your piece on where you want to go with this, and then we can kind of have that quick debate. I don't want to drag this on for another half hour, but let's.
Yeah, I'm
Boyer,
going to make my
start us
piece.
off and we'll see where it goes.
I'm going to make my piece. I'm actually just going to piece out so that way y'all can discuss it. Just so that way I'm not dragging it out. But we've actually made all of my points already tonight, which is we're fucking adults. We've talked about that multiple times now, actually, which is why at one point I hit the home run because you guys made my points within other conversations tonight. That is, we are adults and we can set our lineups. When we set these draft pick fees or whatever for not setting it, it was based off of Nolan not starting a guy who was out for 4 weeks, right? That was the point, in my opinion, as far as how we were going. Now, 100% on other video chats and things like that is that I said we got to kick a manager who's not paying attention out of the league. And to be honest, that's what I think the punishment should be. We weigh the value of the manager versus their bad management, like really bad management, and kick them out, or we say they're, sucks for them for this year. They've been a bad manager. We gotta move on. We have points max 4 to now back us up, right? In case it is somebody who's trying to tank, they can't tank when there's points max 4 in the bottom 4, potentially the bottom 8. So what is the point? All we're doing is just making this league more of a chore, more work. It's less fun than what it is if somebody misses a guy a couple hours, a few hours at 8 o'clock. There's London games. There's all sorts of crazy stuff. My point is, I feel comfortable enough with the league now that we've gotten rid of Chris. Now that Nolan, no offense to Nolan, has clearly gotten on the same page. We've done what we wanted to with it. We made points max 4 has solved the issue for the most part as far as tanking in the bottom. I don't think there's a reason for this anymore. I don't. Mattoon, you've mentioned multiple times tonight that there's been, like webs of things going out as far as whether you have your own pick, don't have your own pick, all this stuff. That happens whether or not I start Eckler or if I start his third string running back. It doesn't matter. I can game the system whether I want to or not, right? Now, if I'm a bad manager and I'm not starting a guy that I want to, that could help me win, that could make me go forward, great. Points max 4, again, backs the league up and makes sure that we're on the same page. So for me, I think at this point, I feel comfortable enough in the league. Obviously, this has happened to me where life changes have happened to me. Could happen to anybody else. To me, it has made this league less fun with how strict this rule has been applied and with how strict this has been going forward. And I have been the benefit of the league saying that they are willing to make concessions for me, and I super appreciate that. But I also feel like the league making those concessions understands that there are, I don't know, ways that we can circumvent these rules. We don't need to do this. We know that I was getting my ass kicked. We know that life got in the way. So why even have the rule? Like, if we value a manager over them getting their butts kicked and being a bad manager, then it's fine, right? Like, so, Chris, Nolan, whatever it was early on, that's when we created the rule. I thought that was a good rule to have, especially for like Corey Davis being out for like 4 weeks straight. but like missing a guy 2 weeks before, or 2 hours before he got ruled out, I think that's just, it's ridiculous. It makes the league less fun. Like I don't know if I can actually be in a league that is that specific all the time. So now, granted, I've got a co-manager, so I'm going to be in the league. Like that's going to happen, which means that you guys get to deal with me going forward. So have fun with that. But that's my whole point, is that we're talking about the webs and all that stuff. I can create all sorts of webs, whether I start a player or not, right? So for me, I think we should abolish it. And if we don't feel like a manager is up to snuff and isn't playing a roster specifically, or not specifically, they're just not paying attention, whatever it is, we just kick them out and we get a new manager. If we value that manager enough, we say, hey, get your shit together, and we move on, just like we were talking about with Andrew's rule in IR, and saying, hey, you got to make sure that they're actually in IR. It's the same, to me, it's the same thing. So that's going to be the piece that I make, and I'm going to actually get off, because that is all I've got. I don't want to argue and make it a big, like, long drawn out conversation. That is my opinion, and I'll let others discuss what their opinion is. If it goes to vote, if it goes to vote, if it gets voted down in this video, it gets voted down in this video. I understand that I was able to circumnavigate the system quite a bit this year, and I appreciate everyone's, understanding this year. So I don't want to take advantage of that in any way, and I'll let you guys discuss going forward.
All right. So I'll start on this topic. Now that Boyer is dipped, whether he was on or not. Part of it was, we're all adults. We all start a lineup. We're playing this to play the game. To me, good manager, good person, good league mate is going to be one that starts an active lineup. I understand there are things that come up where NFL came out this year more specifically, because I had not seen the rule beforehand specifically. But this year they put it up a couple different times, and it said an hour and a half prior to the game, 90, give or take 90 minutes prior to the game, they will be deemed out. And for us, odds are you're checking before the noon games. I would understand maybe more so the late game if something comes up, but to me, we're actively doing a hobby. It's not a job. It's not a whatever. It's a hobby, right? Like, this is what we're here to do. We're all here to hang out, have a good time, play fantasy football. And I understand what's going to come next is the web, right? Colin, you're going to bring it up, where you could have been in the playoffs if Boyer beats Kelly. But I understand the webs are going to happen. I understand things are going to go haywire at some point. But there's a reason we give a warning. So yes, Colin Mattoon says in the chat, he went on that rant jokingly, but it's true. And we talked about it though, for the consolation though. If you traded your pick away and whatever, then things change. And there's a lot of things that can adjust around, right? Based on one thing. And we get life happens, right? Boyer, I love you, and I hope you're listening at some point to this. But I get life happens, and that's why we have the warning. And hopefully with Bagwell coming in, it's going to help. You have that assistant. Underhill has his cousin or nephew or whoever he is that may or may not be able to look at his lineup and be like, yo, you're an idiot. Get that guy out, because he's not even playing. Fryer gets to help Jeremy, right? Because Jeremy's going to mess things up. And Fryer's going to be like, hey, Jeremy, did you see this? And hopefully this is going to solve the problem. It's not going to be a problem. So for me personally, I would like to keep the rule for the sake of, and honestly, if the manager's that bad and they keep tanking and it becomes a problem, yeah, we kick him out of the league. We all would agree that we love Boyer and he's a good manager. And we get life kicked his ass this year, and it's fine. But I still think that it is a important rule, because as we've said all night, we're grown fucking adults. And if that's the case, a grown adult, if you're playing a game, you're going to play the game and you're going to set your best lineup. So I still think the rule is important. I think that it's a good place to be. I don't think we should be as strict on the 3 strikes and you're out rule per se. Yeah, you're going to lose your first. But guess what? I would rather have a good person, a good manager, a good league mate, and losing a first than just kicking people out if life hits them. So you guys can have a say if you would like, but that's where I'm going to leave my opinion for now. Oh, this is
Okay, well, I've gone back and forth on this, and I've talked to Andy about it. I've talked to Mattoon about it. I've talked to Nolan about it. I've talked to you about it to a certain extent. It takes 5 seconds to hop on Sleeper and check the roster. It's not our job. We're not sitting in the office for 8 hours making sure that Amon-Ra St. Broad is feeling good and he's going to play. So for me, I'm kind of more on the strict side of this. I mean, it is what it is. Do I think that the rule needs to go away? Absolutely not. Do I think Boyer needs to get kicked out? No. But I think where we're at right now is where it needs to stay.
I agree with Andy. I acknowledge that life happens, but if you can't handle that and your phone buzzes in your pocket from Bleacher Report, Sleeper, Yahoo, all the different leagues you're in, letting you know who's in, who's out, and you can't figure that out with a freebie across 17 weeks, it's not that hard. And if it is hard, then get help. And if you're gonna not get help, then there's gonna be an issue. I fall on the strict side of this. Take care of your shit or don't play. And
we'll love you either way, whoever you are, because I love
exactly.
all of you that are in here, except for Jeremy. Fryer, thanks for carrying him. But I honestly, everybody that in here, I don't, if you're ready to be done, by all means, I'm not telling you to leave because I love all of you. But by all means, if you leave, I will not have any hard feelings. The league won't have hard.
100%. It's not a
If-
personal thing. I want to play fantasy football. I want to play fantasy football with other people. I want to play fantasy football. If your lineup's not full 4 out of 17 weeks in a year, that's a problem to me. I don't want to play with that person because they're not playing at that point. And if they're not going to step away or bring in help on their own to sort that shit out, then we got to do something about it.
Which is where I'm glad Boyer got Bagwell, because now he's got somebody moving forward and it's going to be fine.
100%. And this shouldn't be an issue, but it has been for various reasons, and hopefully stops here. But I'm 100% with Undy that I fall on the stricter side of this because A, it's not that hard. B, you have plenty of options to get help or text Ty ahead of time. Hey, if this guy's out, do this. There's so many options to get in front of it. And you get a freebie. It's only 17 weeks. Just do it or don't play.
Yeah, secondly, I want to keep this rule. I'm not trying to be a jerk, and I don't think any of us want to create punishments. Any of the conversations that we've had today, none of it I think is to punish a manager, right? But I think everything that we're trying to do is keep the integrity of the league. I'm going to use the buzzword, apparently. We're all adults here, but we are playing for money. You know what I mean? Like, so there's $50 a piece of involved in this. We want to win it all. When I threw out the whole, like, I was affected, I was lost a championship, I said that jokingly because the constant that I kept getting or hearing was, well, I lost that match, it only affected me. And that's not true. You've got 12 or 11 other guys. Some of you have 2 people per roster. There's other people being affected by the decisions that you make. You know, if I don't care and I'm going to set a roster or not set my roster the week that I'm playing Ty, odds are he's going to have 1 game up over the 2 other guys in his league or in his division. You know what I mean? So
Well,
everything
and Paul.
and Paul. Like I said, 2 other guys. Sorry, Paul. Not yet. Not yet. Give us 5 years, man, and we'll be talking about you. So, but so I'm all in favor for keeping this, and you know, it is what it is, but I think we just got to keep it rolling just to keep people on par. And like you said, if we need to text Ty, shoot something out to the league. We've all been there. Kelly went to Europe. I've had flights. Life happens. Just get ahead of it. You know, if a guy hasn't practiced all week, because we get the freaking sleeper notifications, even when Nolan changes his names 3 times a day. So it's not that hard.
All right. If nobody's opposed to keeping the rule, we keep the rule and we move on from here. Because we don't need to have, unless Fryer, Andrew, or Paul wants to say something, but I think you're going to say the same thing everybody else has said. So there's no reason to repeat it a 3rd time, 5th time, 6th time. 4th didn't matter, apparently. But anyway, the last thing that got brought up real quick while we're in here is having a lineup Nazi. If we want to do that, but I think we can have that conversation off of here. Just somebody that goes through and calls out warnings and makes sure everybody's up to date right away. Because I didn't call out Boyers right away. I don't think I even called out Matt's right away because my life gets busy too. So to call out everybody's warnings and everything else, we can appoint that, but at the same time, that lineup Nazi could very well be busy that week and not call it out as well. So I think everybody in the league does a good job at texting me or shooting something in the group chat if somebody's not playing something. So I think that as a whole, we don't need to appoint anybody to be a necessary lineup Nazi, opposed to just, if you see it, just shoot me a message and I'll message that manager. I can send something in the group and just say, hey, I've noticed that so-and-so didn't play a player. Here's your warning. Don't let it happen again. So other than that, I got nothing else for you guys. This went way longer than I expected it to, so my bad. Andrew, I know you're ready for bed.
Yep.
So, all right, if nobody else has anything, I do appreciate you guys. We'll shoot this out to everybody so that anybody else, and then Andy has agreed to take on the survey for me so you guys can all answer survey questions. But at least you all have an idea of what everybody wants and why, the reasoning behind it. So we're going to send something out. I'm going to say to make a change. I'm going to want at least 8 of the 12 managers to make a change. And if it's split, we can have a little argument over something. But I think 8 of 12 would at least give me enough of a majority to say that that's a fair split. 2 of the 3 divisions agree on it. We move on. Everybody go with 8.
Ty, is that 8 of 12 or 8 of 14?
Well, 8 of 12. I don't. I think that the duo managers need to put in one
vote?
survey.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
Fryer,
I'm not casting 2 individual votes again either.
Yeah, no, you don't get to cast 2 individual votes either.
I always vote for me and my dead grandma when I go in. Is that not how you do it?
Depends on what state you're in.
I was gonna say, you sound like Florida and Georgia.
But anyway, all right. On that, we're gonna say 8 of 12 is going to pass a vote here. That'll give Burns and Matt and Kelly and some of them a chance to have an input. If anybody's still listening to this, feel free to throw something in the group chat and tell me your opinion on what's happening. Otherwise, I guess we're out. Have a good night. We'll see you guys later. Yeah, there you go. There's the deuces.